What are music copyrights and how do they work? Well, it's pretty simple to understand. As soon as you are an author, i.e. you write musical songs, or a composer, i.e. you create scores, instrumental tapes or musical bases for songs, then you are considered a creator, and copyright, in fact musical copyright, enables you to protect your works on the one hand, but also to receive remuneration. In other words, when you're a creator of music, whether you're an author or a composer, you can protect your work by registering it with Sacem, the French Society of Authors, Composers and Publishers of Music, which will protect it by stating that you are the creator of the work in question and that you alone can claim authorship and ownership of it, but it will also act as an intermediary with all the different broadcasters. In other words, when a radio station wants to broadcast your work, it will have to obtain Sacem's authorization by paying a financial consideration for the right to broadcast your work. When an artist wants to use or modify one of your works, he or she will also have to obtain your authorization, either through Sacem as an intermediary or directly from you, and so on. And this is basically how music rights work. They protect the creators, authors, and composers of music, but not only that. So we have copyright on the one hand, but we also have what we call phonographic rights, because if tomorrow your creation, your text, your melody form a song, that song in quotation marks doesn't exist until it's been fixed on a physical medium. When a producer intervenes, brings in a performer, and that performer brings your song to life and records it on physical support, thanks to the producer's financing, you end up with an existing work. The exploitation of this work will enable you to generate phonographic rights, and once again, as a creator, performer, or musician, you will be able to receive a share of the remuneration on the revenues generated. This is where the artist's contract between the producer and the main performer comes into play. There are also contracts between the producer and the musicians who are paid to contribute to a track, but we also have contracts with the creators. And above all, each time this work, which is now a finished work, is exploited, part of the rights are also collected and paid back to the creator, as we said at the beginning of this video, author and composer of music. But also, if there is a publisher, we'll come back to this a little later, the publisher takes a share, but also the performer and the accompanying musicians, since they will receive what we call performers' neighboring rights each time a work is exploited. This means that the artist or musician has received a fee for the studio session. When you've spent 5 hours in the studio working on a track, you've been paid for it. This also means that when the track itself is sold and generates money, part of it goes to the lead artist and possibly also to the musicians or music creators. But it also means that as soon as the track is exploited and generates exploitation, visibility, whether on the radio, on TV, in concert, in a concert hall, at a festival with a sound system, in short, every time it is broadcast somewhere, it collects rights. Part of these royalties is collected by the assassin to remunerate the authors and composers of music, but part of these royalties is also collected by what is known as Adami and the Spedidam, which remunerate the performers, i.e. the main performers on the one hand, but also the accompanying musicians on the other. That's why, for example, I don't know about me, a guy who played guitar on a song that became a worldwide hit would end up taking, I don't know about me, 100,000 francs a year without doing anything, as long as the song continued to be exploited on a worldwide scale. Mind you, to generate 100,000 neighboring places for a backing musician, you really need to get it rolling, but it's possible. This means that every time an artist or musician works on a track, if he or she declares his or her work on the work correctly, he or she can claim, if he or she is a creator, copyright via the assassin, and if he or she is a performer or accompanying musician, neighboring performers' rights via the aspect of idem and or adami. And what about the producer? Well, it's the same thing. He receives the revenue from exploitation at source, digital sales, streaming, compilations and so on, but he also receives neighboring producers' rights. So every time a track is released, he collects money from two organizations in France, the ASCPP and the ASPPF. SCPP stands for Société Civile des Producteurs de Phonogrammes and SPPF for Société des Producteurs de Phonogrammes Français. As you can see, music rights represent a financial trunk which is not insignificant. I'm not saying that there aren't other sources of income, but it also means that a work, as soon as it is exploited and generates a minimum of visibility, it will remunerate the creators, authors and composers, but also the musicians, the lead artist and the producer. And now we're going to look at a final category of rights: private copy and equitable remuneration based on sales. So what does this mean? Roughly speaking, when you have a storage medium on sale in France, a very small part of the sales price is collected, substituted in quotation marks, for the sellers to be paid back as a private copy, and part of these sums is then paid out to the various players in the industry based obviously on sales, because if tomorrow you have 1 million Apple computer, whatever sold, you have a sum that is collected, it's normal to give in quotation marks by proportionality to the biggest sellers. A guy who sold 12 million albums is going to get more than a guy who sold 3 singles. It's perfectly normal. So that's what private copy is all about in a simplified and generalized way, and equitable remuneration will also make it possible to collect an additional share, which will also be paid out to the various players in the music industry. So this whole mechanism, which I've described with a bit of pomp and circumstance, you'll find a much more detailed video linked in the description of this video, in which I'll go into more detail this time, with diagrams to back it up on the exact functioning of rights in the music industry. But this whole little microcosm is going to enable the music industry to have a rather healthy economy that's working rather well, because beyond the fact that we get money as soon as a record is sold or streamed or bought by digital voice, there's also synchro, i.e. the fact of placing music in images. We can collect money on signing, but also collect copyright, performers' neighboring rights, and producers' neighboring rights. In short, this whole ecosystem means that in reality, an artist can make a living from his or her music without relying solely on studio or concert fees or on the merchandising that may be sold. And it's in this way that many backing musicians who have remained in the shadows have been able to create some pretty nice alternative incomes with the rights generated by the tracks they've worked on. The same goes for producers and publishers. I haven't mentioned publishers yet, but it's something that's been around for a number of years. Once again, I've made videos on this YouTube channel to explain this to you, but the publisher will be able to collect up to half the rights to a work from the assassin, the author, the composer. When there is no publisher, it's half the rights. When there is a publisher, it's half the rights for the authors, half for the composers, and half for the publishers. And in return for the share they take, the publisher must help you develop the work's visibility, ensure regular marketing and exploitation, and enable you to network. Track the distribution of titles to make sure you know where the work has been sold, where it has been exploited, and whether all the money has been collected, and will enable you to protect yourself by managing plagiarism. You see, if someone uses one of your tracks, the publisher can intervene to make it clear that he's there and issue an authorization or not, if that ever happens. He'll also act as a bulwark when there are attacks made directly on the work, and so on. In short, the publisher's role is one of protection, commercial support, networking support, and also administrative and legal monitoring of the work. And that's how music rights work. If you've ever enjoyed this video, been motivated, inspired, or learned something, then give me a big like and subscribe to the Successful Producer YouTube channel. And don't hesitate to check out the other videos I've made on the subject. You'll learn more about publishing, sub-publishing, copyright, neighboring rights, which distribution keys to use, how to protect your works, the role of the memo dial in protecting a work, etc. I think you have a lot to learn if you're interested in this subject. There are a few links in the description for you to look at if you want to go further. I wish you all the best for the future. Tear it up and say ciao ciao.